I want to welcome you this afternoon to the third annual dialogue that we hold in the College of Humanities and Sciences. I'm Chris Comer, and I have the pleasure of being the Dean of the College. And we use this event for several reasons, for several functions, I should say. One of those, of course, is just to get the faculty and the students and the staff together to celebrate the year and to celebrate the life of academia, to hear from some of our top scholars. And then secondly, we like to celebrate some of the teaching accomplishments of our faculty. So we usually use this as an event to give out some major teaching awards. So we're going to start this year in the same way. And the first award I'd like to tell you about is an award that we have generally called the Teaching Across the Curriculum Award. And this is an award that we think captures the spirit of teaching in the college in a very important way. We have fabulous faculty, and they teach some pretty challenging courses at upper levels of the curriculum. But we really value the fact that so many of our great faculty reach down and teach introductory courses for students who are just arriving on campus and make a great effort to do that with panache and really get the students off to a good start. And we think that's so important that there's an award for this purpose. The history of the award is that it came about with discussions at the college's external advisory board. We have a wonderful board of 14 people that gather twice a year to talk over college issues, and they really have an active interest in the life of the college. So the award was just called the Teaching Across the Curriculum Award, but I want to tell you that while it was an award funded from current donations in the past, this year the board decided to get serious about it, and every single member of the board contributed to the point where we got an endowed fund from that. So we will now have this award every year in perpetuity, and because the board felt particularly stirred up about this, through the actions of one of their members, we're going to name it after that person. And we're very thrilled that he's here with us today, Dr. Bill Reynolds. As I suspected, almost all of you know Dr. Bill Reynolds anyway, but Bill has been on the board since I've been dean and for long before that, and he's been a real moving force in some of the most progressive discussions we've had. He's a real intellectual force on the board, and we really love him dearly. So this award will be named for he and for his wife, so it will forever be the Joe and Bill Reynolds Award for Teaching Across the Curriculum. So we couldn't be happier for you, and what a great honor for the college. Thank you, Bill, for all your work. It's also exciting to announce this year's winner. The college gets great nominations for this every year. We judge them with very gimlet eye, as they say. And the award winner this year is Dr. Stephen Yoshimura from the Department of Communication Studies. So before I give the award, let me just tell you a few things. We, of course, have a formal citation in here explaining why the award was given, and it sort of gives the evidence-based that we're using here. So I want to just tell you a few things. I'm not going to read the whole citation. That would be a bit too much. But what his colleagues say is that each and every year, he teaches his courses, and each and every one of his courses with intellectual rigor, creativity, and a commitment to student learning and growth. And that kind of captures everything right there. He is described as a model teacher scholar. And this phrase, you have to love this, his hard work helped makes the college and our department ideal environments for research and learning. And that's really what we're all about. And we know that good teaching is intimately linked to scholarship. And that's why we're a university, and that's why we're the college we are. So I would like to present this award to Steve, and there's a certificate that comes with it. And Normally, at events like this, you find out that the check is in the mail. In this case, it's not. It's in this envelope, and I'd like to give it to you. So, it's all yours.
My colleague, Alan Sillers, tells me that the awards that you win are more important than the awards that you don't win, and I certainly feel that in this case. It's a huge honor to be standing up here. But of course, things like this only happen with the support of a lot of other people, and so I just wanted to recognize the role that my colleagues play in helping me stand here. And really, I'm in the presence of giants around my colleagues, such as Sarah Hayden and Christina Yoshimura, as well as Betsy Bach and Steve Schwartz and Greg Larson, Joel Iverson, and Alan Sillers. They're really the best colleagues I could hope to have. And I'd like to thank the committee and Dean Comer for their time and care and caring for the award. But of course, I would like to thank my students at all levels. The students at UM are among the most gracious and hardworking students that I've ever encountered, and teaching them is an award unto itself. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Jenny McNulty, the Associate Dean in the college, and it is my great pleasure to make the college's first ever Excellence Award for teaching at the introductory level. I need my glasses, sorry. This award was created to recognize the hard work of our non-tenure track faculty members who demonstrate superior teaching, who are engaged in student advising and mentoring, and who are accessible to students beyond normal office hours. The award is funded this year through the Helen and Winston Cox Educational Excellence Fund. As you can imagine, when we offered this award the first time, we had lots and lots of applications. So we are fortunate to be able to make 2 awards this year. The awards go to Lauren Fern in the Department of Mathematical Sciences and Diane Friend in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. Could you both come up? First, some numbers about Lauren. Lauren educates almost 400 students each semester. She has taught at UM for 13 years, and she teaches at the 100 level in the math department. And she's one of the best teachers on campus. Lauren is known as an inspiring, dedicated, positive, encouraging, devoted, enthusiastic, optimistic, caring, passionate teacher. And as Dean Comer said, there's a nice citation in this envelope, along with a nice check. But I'd like to read a little story that one of Lauren's Math 117 students told. So this is a non-traditional student. He described the scene at the beginning of his first Math 117 class in the following way. Imagine over 100 students from a variety of backgrounds and majors crammed into the URI Underground Lecture Hall and being forced to learn something they thought they hated and who have been told in the past they lack the intelligence to succeed. Then imagine a lecturer entering the class with a charismatic attitude who captivates the class and engages them in mathematics. While this sounds like an impossible feat, it happens each time Lauren Fern teaches. Let's give her a round of applause. I'm going to embarrass Diane next, and then they each have a chance to talk. Diane teaches introductory astronomy courses with subjects that range from the evolving universe to the science of science fiction. She plays a pivotal role in teaching students how to gather and analyze astronomical data and expects students to be thinking, questioning, and contributing members of their own academic development. Now, some adjectives. These are all from your students, by the way. I didn't make these up. Diane is an inspiring, enthusiastic, friendly, well, that's her name, isn't it? Knowledgeable, welcoming, engaging, effective instructor. Because of her constant dedication to the introductory astronomy curriculum, her colleagues describe her as the ambassador of astronomy. When she's not on campus, you can find her up at the Blue Mountain Observatory giving presentations, or at the local schools, or now in our new planetarium. Let's give her a round of applause.
So I've been fretting all day about what I would say because while I can get up in front of a group of students and talk about mathematics, I'm a nervous wreck. So I first want to thank everybody who has supported me, the math department, especially Michelle, Melanie, and there's so many others. I'm truly honored and humbled by this award. I just have a couple things to say, and I promise I won't talk too long. Simply put, I adore math, how clean and beautiful it is, and I just strive to share that beauty that I see with my students. I view teaching any class, whether it's a class of 10 or 250 people, as a conversation. It's an interaction between myself and my students. Teaching math at the introductory level can be a true challenge, not only due to the fact that many students in these courses either dislike math or have had bad experiences, but also because they may have many gaps in their background, which also prevents them from understanding new material. Thus, I try to spend a lot of time figuring out where they're at mathematically. I do my best to meet them where they are and guide them, showing them not only what, but how and why. In mathematics, the intuition and thought processes are crucial at any level. I truly care about my students mathematically, academically, and personally. I love the students here at UM, and I just want to say thank you. I'm very proud to be a member of our math department. We have a wonderful math department. I'm proud to be a member of this college and University of Montana and our students. So, thank you.
I'll be real short. I have no prepared remarks. I would like to very much thank the college for offering this new award. I know so many people who I thought would get this award because I know a lot of non-tenure track faculty who are extremely passionate, brilliant, and dedicated to what they do and put their heart into their students and their classes. And so I am very humbled to get this award in the company of so many people who deserve it so much. So I'd like to thank you guys for initiating this award. I also look forward to who will be getting it next year. And I'd also like to thank, of course, my department and my students because the physics astronomy department is just like home. Everybody has an open door policy. It's a very small, very tight-knit department, and our students are enthusiastic, our faculty is enthusiastic, and it's just a wonderful environment to work in. And so it's been a lot of fun. I was waiting for Jenny to embarrass me, saying how long I had been there. But it is amazing, and it's been fun over the years to see where the students go and to see them when they come back with their significant others and their degrees and keep track of them over time. So it's just been a pure joy. And, of course, I'll put in a plug for astronomy. Astronomy is just the most wonderful thing in the world. So my problem is how not to be too enthusiastic so that I overwhelm my students. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you all for those comments. It's really nice to hear from our staff and get a chance to appreciate the wonderful things that they do. We're going to shift gears now to the main point of the program, and that is really to have a discussion, a dialogue. And I want to tell you how this originated. In the last couple of years, it starts out the same way. We choose individuals on the faculty for whom we have great respect, and we go to them and we say, what's a topic that we should be talking about this year? And they help us formulate that topic. And typically, I take those involved out to lunch or dinner, and we talk about it, and they decide what they want to cover. I talked to Albert Borgman about the possibility of overseeing the dialogue this year, and he was immediately gracious and said he would be happy to do that. And he also made me promise not to say anything to embarrass him, so I won't. But when I said to him, what sort of topic might we cover, in about 15 milliseconds, which is amazing because the normal human reaction time to speech is about 200 milliseconds, he said, general education. So general education it is. And I think we've gathered together a group of faculty who have immense experience generally with teaching and also some experience at this institution. And I think the goal will be for them to stimulate some interesting discussions amongst the crowd tonight. So I want to introduce Albert. I want to tell you just that by way of perspective, you all know that Albert is a Regents Professor of Philosophy here at the university. And just to get myself in the mood of perspective, I went back this morning and I pulled his personnel file, and I just looked it over to get a sense of Albert's trajectory. And I won't go through all the details. We all know him as an intellectual force on the campus, but I will just say I was impressed when I realized that the letter of offer was effected in 1970, and it was signed by President Panzer, and at the time Dick Solberg was dean of the college, and Henry Bugbee was the chair of philosophy. So that really gives you a sense of the extent to which Albert has really been a part of UM's history, and I couldn't be more pleased than to have Albert overseeing this dialogue this evening. So Albert, take it away.
So let me begin by introducing our panelists. The person leftmost, from your point of view, is Liz Putnam. She's a professor of molecular genetics and toxicology, and at the moment she is the interim dean of the Davidson Honors College. Next to her is Linda Jillison. She is professor of classics. And then there's Mark Kyle. He is professor of mathematical sciences. So the format is I'll begin with a brief introduction, laying out some distinctions pertaining to general education that we should keep in mind. And then Mark will follow me with the presentation, and then Linda, and finally Liz. And then I will be the moderator and recognize questions and comments, and I'll try to be fair. The introductory part, consisting of our presentations, should take no more than half an hour, so there will be ample time for the dialogue part, in which we want to hear what you have to say and respond as best we can. So starting out then, there are a few distinctions we have to keep in mind when we talk about general education. The first is the distinction between training and education. They overlap, but in the non-overlapping part, training is imparting those skills that allow a person to pay the rent and take a position of responsibility in society. And the non-overlapping part of education is an enabling. To educate is to enable, just as to withhold education from a person is to disable that person. So we can think of education as enabling a person to live a life of world citizenship and virtue. So just stipulating this for the moment, there is a second distinction we have to keep in mind, and those are approaches in the attempt to provide general education. And the two approaches are the distributional and the core curriculum approach. The distributional approach draws up 4 or 5 categories: natural sciences, biological sciences, social sciences, humanities, say. And then you take existing courses from the majors and assign them to one or more of these categories. And then a student has to satisfy one course, or perhaps 2, in each of the categories. How many courses do you think there are? Well, in the hundreds. So in 1983-84, we had 520 here at the university. And right now we have 376 in the substantive, in the 9 substantive groups, so-called. The contrasting approach is the core curriculum approach. And it came out of Harvard, and it was the result of a committee appointed by the president. And the idea of the core curriculum is that there should be courses specifically designed for general education. And they may fall into the same groups, but rather than just picking courses that are already existing, they're designed to introduce a student to what the educated person needs to know. That because although general education is a complex and difficult issue, it answers that simple question: what does the educated person need to know? And this committee at Harvard drew up a core curriculum of a limited number of courses. And it also established the idea of a general education rather than the more traditional term, a liberal education. And the document is titled General Education in a Free Society, 1945. This is known as the Red Book. And it's the greatest document I think, in American higher education. And now let me say a word where I want to make good on my stipulation. What is it to live a life of world citizenship and virtue? Think of the world as a house. It has an overall structure, that's mathematics. It has a foundation, that's physics. It has a basement, that's chemistry. It has a first floor, that's the biological and social sciences. And then it has a top floor, that's the humanities and the arts. And before I continue, let me make good on what it is to live a life of virtue. You don't force students to live a life of virtue. You enable them to do so. And how do you do that? Well, you tell them what it is to live a life of fortitude, a life of cowardice, what it is to be an authentic leader, what it is to live in war, what it is to live in peace, what it is to build, what it is to destroy. And you learn this through the substance and the subject matter of the humanities and the arts. There is one more distinction, and it lines up with the distinction between the distributional approach and the core curriculum approach. And it's the difference between, on the one side, approach, procedure, method, critical thinking. And on the other side, you have substance, subject matter. The first is easy, right? You can't teach anything, whatever, and claim that you have taught the student to think like a historian, to be acquainted with the scientific method. And but the problem with this is the following. general education should be an introduction of students to the world. Think of the world as that house that I've described. And you want them to be familiar with that house and to inhabit it. And the procedural approach, the distributional approach, the critical thinking approach is handing them a key to the house and say, look around and see what you like. And then what happens? Well, there's a lot of social science evidence on what happens. They go to one room that happens to be windowless, and they stay there for the rest of their lives. Don't ask me what they're doing in that one room. And they do not inhabit, they're not familiar with the world that they live in. And I may be wrong, but my panelists will tell you more. So then the first to say his piece on general education is my colleague, Mark. Hi.
Thank you, Albert. Albert's a tough act to follow, isn't he? Thank you all for coming. And thanks for making me a part of this. This isn't exactly my element. I lecture on mathematics, and I usually have half my back to the audience. And I look over every now and then to make sure they're staying with me, but I get to face you. And I'll start with my own dirty little secret. I was educated in Canada at a university that describes itself as a comprehensive university. It is not a liberal arts university. It is not a liberal arts college. They have essentially no liberal education requirements. A student can go to Simon Fraser University and focus in on their one room, as Albert referred to, and stay there pretty much for the whole education. And I didn't quite do that, but I kind of did that. So there's my secret. A few days before we gathered as a group to discuss these topics, I had read an obituary of a mathematician that I admire, and he had this metaphor that I like for learning, which is the human mind is not to be thought of as a bucket to be filled with water, but rather as a fire to be sparked. I really like that. So I shared this at our gathering, and Linda, who was sitting to my right, oh, Mark, that's Plutarch. That's so beautiful. Before that, my only experience with Plutarch was in a combinatorial mathematics book where some of his writing had included some bizarre numbers, and it was listed as an open problem, a research problem, to figure out what Plutarch meant. So this book was written in around 1990, and only recently I think that problem was solved. But I wish I had known that quote before the gathering. I would have felt more worldly. So my first question then is, did my undergraduate training fail me? And as a quick answer, short answer, I would say yes and no. But I'd like to leave that question hanging for a few minutes. Albert asked us to speak about how our own disciplines fit into the broader framework of general education. So my discipline is mathematics, and I'd like to begin this discussion with a quote from a book on set theory by one of the masters of mathematical exposition. That's Paul Haumish. So I brought the book. It's thin. We like them that way. Before I give you the quote, though, I want you to know that, if you don't know this already, that set theory is the foundational branch of mathematics. All of mathematics comes down to sets, not numbers. Numbers are built from sets. So set theory is it. It all comes down to that. And that's for a pure mathematician, but it also applies to applied mathematics, because applied mathematics takes pure mathematics and applies it to real-world settings, and having been built from pure mathematics, it also comes down to set theory. So that's it. That's the foundational subject. And Paul Halmush, at the end of the preface of this book, says this. I don't need to open it because I memorized it. Read it, absorb it, forget it. You got that? Read it, absorb it, forget it. So the first time I read that, I was in graduate school, and I thought, this is a person who does not have ego problems. He writes a book on the very foundations of mathematics, and then invites you to forget it. So I thought that it was a pretty radical idea at the time, and I wondered about what sort of person he would be. But over the years, I've come to realize he's right. He's right about forgetting it. And it's refreshing that he gives us permission to do what we're all going to do anyway. This is the way the human mind works. We forget. My high school algebra teacher used to remind us this again and again. It's good that we forget. When somebody dies, when we go through a stressful time, we want to forget. We want to kind of get those in our past. If they're in the front of our mind all the time, we can never move on. But then if you want to learn math, you've got to work against that. If you want to learn anything, you've got to work against that. But maybe the experience of reading and absorbing, as Paul Halmush instructs us to do, somehow changes us. And I started these words today confessing that this isn't my most natural element to be speaking. So I was kind of nervous, and I was speaking with my wife about this, and I told her about this quote from Paul Halmush, and she said, well, she teaches literature at Loyola High School. She said, well, that's the same thing we hope in literature. When you close The Great Gatsby, or take your own favorite piece of great literature, a year later, you're probably going to forget the names of the main characters, and you're probably going to forget quite a few of the plot elements. And you're probably going to forget many, many things about the book. But maybe the book changed you. Maybe reading the book changed you. And that, I think, is one kernel for the whole of education, especially higher education. We enroll in university, we sit through a series of classes, we listen to lectures, we do the readings, we study for exams, we do our best to learn, and then maybe that changes us. We're probably going to forget most of the details. And this brings me to my next question, which is, how would I like my students to be changed? So there's answers to this question on many, many levels. The sort of easy levels are, I'd like them to be better at mathematics. And I'd like them to have a better appreciation for mathematics. But really what I want, the holy grail for me in teaching, what I want my students to learn is what the subject is. Most people think it's a subject of numbers, geometry, calculation, symbolic computation, numeracy. The list could go on and on. How to understand word problems. But that's not to me what mathematics is. And I thought the best way to demonstrate that would be to actually show you a proof and then talk about mathematical proof a little bit. So we're going to have a little proof. So now I get to turn my back halfway to you. Albert promised me rock stars do this. You can do it. So I'm going to show you a mathematical proof, one short proof. So the square root of 2, that's the number that when you multiply it by itself, you get 2. Now my mathematician friends are going to be thinking, no, don't prove the square root of 2 is irrational. It's too long. I'm not going to prove it. But humans have known for back to the Pythagorean times that that's an irrational number. So root 2 cannot be written as a ratio of integers. Those are whole numbers. A and B are whole numbers. You cannot write root 2 like that. And this is, as I said, it's been known back to the Pythagoreans. So such a number is called an irrational number. And the question I'm going to ask you to think about for a second, but I'm going to quickly answer it, is, are there irrational numbers, x and y, so that x to the y, so these are supposed to be irrational now, can't be written as a ratio of integers. Are there numbers like that when you take that exponent, you get a rational number, you get back a rational? So can you do that? I don't want to write too much on this small board. So x and y are now to be thought of as irrational numbers. Can you do that? Can you find irrational numbers where this result will be rational? What do you think? Well, if the answer was no, I wouldn't have brought this problem. You can do it. But let's see a proof. Let's prove it. So case 1 is, I'm going to look at the square root of 2 raised to the square root of 2. Is that rational? I don't know. But if it is, if that's rational, then I've answered my question. I have an irrational, based on this fact that goes back 2,600 years. I've got an irrational to an irrational, and it's rational. And so I found numbers like that. So if that's true, then the answer is yes. So case 2, it's not. It's not rational. So either it is or it isn't, right? So if it's not rational, if this number is not rational, now we've got ourselves another irrational number. Besides root 2, now we've got a new one to talk about. Let's look at this, and I have enough room to finish it here. Let's look at this last number. So if you're at the back and you can't quite see, it's the square root of 2 raised to the square root of 2, then raised again to the square root of 2. So if you're rusty on your exponent laws, when you have a stack of exponents like this, you get to multiply coming down here. So it's going to be root 2 raised to the root 2 times root 2. But root 2 times root 2 is 2. So it's that. And what's that? That's 2 over 1. Rational, a good rational number. So in the case that this number is irrational, we have an irrational raised to an irrational from way back when, and we got rational. One of these two cases has to hold. And in either case, we answer this yes. So that's it. That's a proof. There are irrational numbers that you could raise one to the other and get back. There are irrational numbers. You could raise one to the other, get back into the realm of rational numbers. Who cares? I don't actually care that much about that fact. My passion for this comes from the flow of ideas that allows someone to take the question and actually prove that. That's an irrefutable proof. That truth now is forever. There's no other truth in the human experience like mathematical truth. You think about legal proofs. Well, the Supreme Court comes along in 40, 50 years and changes the opinion, and that legal truth that was just etched in legal books that's not true anymore. But that's not how it works with math. This is proved. It's done. So that's what really gets me jazzed about mathematics. It's the flow of ideas the fact that you can actually prove something like this and get to this level of truth. So that's, to me, what mathematics is about, is the search for proof, understanding how the world fits together. This is just one small example. In a typical class, the proof takes a whole day. It takes the whole class. So you're looking at deeper things than this. But the pattern is still there. We prove a theorem, and now that is true forever. So does that mean I place mathematics above everything? Is it the very best subject? Well, sort of. I sort of do. But what I mean by that is, for me, mathematics is really on a high level for me. I'm passionate about it. I love it. This is what I love about it. But a meta answer to that question, my question earlier about what I want my students, how do I want them to be changed, is I want them to see their professors as people passionate about what they do. And hopefully this will help them find their own passions. And I think this is a laudable goal for general education. So I said I was going to leave my original question hanging. Did my undergraduate education training fail me? So on the yes side of that, we've got this whole Plutarch incident. Well, this has happened to me again and again on campus. I was serving on faculty senate, and I didn't know what a standard Latin phrase meant. Had to ask someone on ECOS what it meant. Oh, it means I'm sorry. But did anything bad really happen from this experience with Linda at the table? And to me, nothing really bad happened. In fact, the event ended up having me make a connection with Linda. So on the no side of that question, did my undergraduate training fail me? Well, I found my passion, and I became a lifelong learner. So my last question, I've probably gone over time, but Albert's still smiling, so. So the question is, could we arrive at a system, a general education system, where the answer to that first question, instead of being yes and no, the answer is only no? Could we get there? So you're going to hear tonight lots of discussion about different sorts of general education systems. We've got the one that's here, which is constantly evolving, and we've got the one from my undergraduate school. Another extreme are the Great Books programs. You've heard of those. Students enter the program, and all they study for the whole higher education is the great books created by humans. This is a wonderful idea. But when students get to graduate school from those programs, sometimes they really thrive and sometimes they don't. We've had examples in the math department where a student went through a Great Books program, studied Euclid, the Principia, Lobachevsky, the great books of mathematics. And they find that they're 1 or 2 years behind their peers in modern mathematics, and they get overwhelmed and wash out of the program. That's happened. And then we've also had students come and thrive. So that's the other extreme, and I think its answer is also yes and no. So I actually don't think that question has an answer, that there is a general education system where the answer could only be no. But I think it's important to have this dialogue. And with that, I'll end, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I was sitting behind you, and I'm going to use that for the excuse for my not understanding a word that Mark was talking about. So I'm still waiting for that truth. Maybe I'll take a Molly class next year when I'm retired, and they'll be able to help me figure out that truth. This is really an exciting kind of conversation to have, because Mark is passionate about his
part of general education and his part of liberal education and his part of the university, because you can figure out a truth that is a truth forever. And there's no question about it, right? You prove your proof, and that's it. And I'm excited about my part, which is the humanities, because we don't deal in truths that live forever. We deal in complexities of human society and complexities of human nature. And we hope that our students will learn, among other things, that complexity and even ambiguity are elements which are persistent in human life and in human undertakings and in the artifacts that human beings leave behind to represent their undertakings and their wishes and their ambitions. When we got involved in this business about Plutarch the other night, I was really excited to hear Mark say what he said, because Plutarch makes this comment in the course of an essay on listening, which he wrote to help students learn how they ought to listen to a lecture, which is not too dated an essay, by the way. But what he talked about was the fact that we really do need to turn on students' minds. We need to excite them. We need, as far as I know, he's the first person who said the mind should not be thought of as a vessel to be filled, but as a pile of firewood to be kindled. And so it's interesting to me that I feel that way about my students and my discipline, and that Mark feels the same way about his discipline. And when we get to Liz, she's going to talk to us a little bit more about the professional schools. So I think what both Mark and I would like to see in our students as a result of any of the classes that we teach, and maybe particularly gen ed students, since we get them early on typically. Our system here is that most of our gen ed classes are mostly lower division classes rather than upper division classes. And that's another system that we could talk about, because there are other schools where that's not the case. One doesn't think of getting general education out of the way and then moving on to the important stuff, right? But one of the things that we can think about, and it's a comment to Mark's aspiration and to mine, is that we want our students to have eureka moments, a great Greek word that means I found it, I discovered it, right? One Greek scientist leapt out of his bathtub naked and ran into the street shouting, I found it, when he discovered a particular principle. So I don't ask my students to do that. In fact, I'd prefer they not. But that's the kind of moments that I think all of us, at least I hope that all of us who work in gen ed and who work in liberal arts, liberal education, as well as those of us who work in classes with majors, with students who are specializing in a particular field, will feel that we want our students to have the same kind of eureka moments that we have a lot when we do our own work. And often, I think, from teaching our students. It doesn't have to be only with research, but teaching students can give you that kind of moment as well. So now that I've said sort of the enthusiastic cheerleader sort of thing, I want to get down to the nitty-gritty. And what I've tried to do is think about my own program, which is a classics program. So we teach Latin, we teach Greek, and we teach a lot of courses in classical civilization. And a lot of those contribute to gen ed on this campus. So I sort of wanted to look at the content of those courses and the kinds of skills and content and habit that I would like our classics courses to contribute to a student's general education here on this campus. Most of our language courses are relatively small. We also have classical civ courses, classical civilization courses, in which we tend to read Latin or Greek literature in translation with students who may or may not be there to work in their major field. And those classical civ courses range anywhere from 12 students to 150 students. So we work into gen ed in various ways, as I think you'll see. So I just want to give you some ideas about how I think our program fits into what I think gen ed ought to do, and then look forward to some of your conversation about this. So first of all, I should just state some of my preferences about a strong gen ed program. First of all, I don't myself favor a content-neutral gen ed program. That means a general education program in which there are certain outcomes which one must reach, but it doesn't really matter what content one focuses on, in the course of the class. I think that if we're thinking of general education, the content is crucial. We're talking about the kinds of things that all educated people should learn. I want to just say to the side, and I hope it doesn't cause too much tumult, but I myself am a little bit concerned when in the past several years I've heard us more and more refer to students as the future workforce. And I think we've begun to talk about our students as the future workforce as more and more students come to the university. Somehow we've begun to decide that not all students could get the same education that the smaller number, the maybe more elite students could get. That bothers me a bit, and I think that we should think of general education particularly as being education, not training, as Albert outlined the distinctions between those, but that everybody should be thought of as a student who is being educated at this university, as Albert said, for virtue and for citizenship. And we should not begin to think of our students as the future workforce. I believe that that's, to my mind, it's a rather insidious way to begin to identify them when we begin to take in a lot of students who may not have been able to attend the university 25 years ago. So we can chat about that later. So I think that the content of a general ed course is very important. I also think that the skills which a student uses and applies and learns in a gen ed course are very important. I think that these ought to be skills which the student applies to the content of the general education course and then can also use outside once he or she completes BA education at the University of Montana and then goes to a job or goes further on to graduate school or professional school or wherever. So I think that skills are important. And thirdly, I believe that since we have most students at this university in their early semesters in general education courses, we should be trying to inculcate some habits of engagement with the material, dedication to the material, paying focused attention to material. And we should pretty quickly be teaching them, and general ed is a good place to do this, that we are in a different kind of project now at the university than they were in high school. This may mean that they're going to have to work a lot harder than they worked in high school. It's a real shock for some of our students. So I want to say that my remarks now are not going to be approved by a lot of 18-year-olds probably who are planning their university careers, but I myself do not believe that we're here to answer to the desires of 18-year-old Montana students who may not know what they need to know later. So that's just the way I feel about it, and we can chat about it later. That out of the way, I know. That out of the way, I want to say that my remarks are mostly going to be about classics, but many of them will have to do with any of the language programs and culture programs in which people in my department are involved. I know classics better, so I'll talk first about classics. First of all, we have language courses and then we have classical civ courses. The learning of a language, even the understanding of how millions, if not billions of people every day work hard to learn our English language so that we do not have to learn any of their languages, is, I think, critical to what we do at this university. And there are certain technical things that happen in language learning: morphology and syntax, forms and syntax. How does the form fit into the syntax? But a very important concept in language learning is, how do different people make meaning in their expression? A lot of our students know nothing except English. They assume that the only way to express oneself is the way we express ourselves in English. And pretty quickly, no matter what language you learn that that's not the case. If we're truly going to be global citizens, I think we need to learn someone else's language. The advantage of classics, and again, I'm going to say, as Mark said, does this mean I like classics better than everything else? Well, yes. Right? That's why I'm in classics and I'm not a mathematician. But that's why we're in this conversation. The advantage to Latin and Greek learning is that those languages have been so important in our own languages that really it just enlarges the horizon of our students linguistically to have learned such a language. So the content is very, very important. The fact that there are hundreds of thousands, millions of people who make meaning every day, who communicate every day in ways that we do not, is good for our students to know. At the higher levels of language study, students get entree into some of the masterworks of Western literature, history, and so on. Even at the lower level, however, students can learn and begin to find in context some of the best ideas that have ever been expressed in the West. And again, I'm going to talk only about the West because these are the languages I know. If any of my Asian language friends are out there, I'm sure you'll have something to add. Some of these ideas might be, the unexamined life is not worth living. Or, it is a sweet and fitting thing to die for one's country. Or, the mind is not a vessel needing to be filled, but a fire needing to be kindled. Or, the square of the hypotenuse of a right triangle equals the sum of the squares of the two sides. Is that right? Good. Whew. That's about what I remember from math. Right? All of these things one finds in first-year Latin or first-year Greek. One encounters these kinds of statements, but in a real context, in a living context, and I think that's important. And thirdly, as far as content, we talk about various cultures. And again, Latin culture and Greek culture were cultures which contributed importantly to the way we live in the Western world today. So an important contribution to the students' intellectual life. Language study also gives some critical distance from English, whatever language you study. It pulls you back from English. It pulls one back from English. Not only that, but many of my Latin students and Greek students, and I'm sure that any other language teacher will report the same, report that they never knew how English worked until they took a foreign language. And in a time when employers and graduate programs and professional schools are requiring that students be able to read and speak and write in appropriate and persuasive ways, I think this is too bad. It does mean that many students have to learn two languages at the same time, their own and another one. But this is one place where Latin and Greek are really important. They're very analytical languages, right? Thirdly or fifthly or whatever, in small, highly interactive, intensive language classes, students get a lot of feedback. They get to know their professors. They get to know what our passions are. They get to know why we're teaching what we're teaching. Many of them ask us to write letters of recommendation for them, even though they're in a different major, because we know them well and we work well with them face to face and in an intensive way. One of the habits that I'll talk about is the habit of focus, discipline, and paying constant attention to something which is difficult. And my students are always really surprised when I tell them at the very beginning of the first day of class, you really will have to work on your Latin 2 hours a night. We say in the catalog, be prepared to prepare, don't we still? To prepare for 2 hours outside class for every hour inside class? Well, my students are really kind of surprised when I point out that might happen. But they persevere, by gosh, and I think it's because I'm passionate about what I do. They get to love the pain. I don't know what it is exactly. But I think that this habit of interaction with a difficult topic, which can really give you a sense of accomplishment when you've finished, a sense that you've measured yourself up against a reality which does not change because of what you want from it, but rather is always the same, and it's your job to learn to deal with that reality. I think that's a very important lesson for our students to learn. So, persistence, constancy of attention, and comfort with intellectual complexity are things which I think come from the learning even of a first-year language, which is the only requirement we have here. When we talk about our classical civ courses, they vary in focus: literary, historical, philosophical. I teach the big one, which is mythology, but it's actually a literature course. And here's the content thing. These are actually the foundational narratives for Western civilization. They came from the Bible, and they came from the classical world. And many, many of our students do not know these foundational narratives at all any longer. I know that it's important now that we study diverse narratives as well, but to my mind, these are the narratives which you're going to encounter over and over. Your response may be to resist them, to react against them. Who knows what your response must be? But if you don't know who Ishmael was, or you don't know who Augustus was, you don't know who was the first Roman emperor, you don't know who Julius Caesar was, you don't know a lot about references that come up day after day in conversation. The skills learning in these courses are diverse. If it's a small class, many of our writing classes, small classes are writing classes. One practices the analysis of complex text in writing. There's not a better skill than that for a student who is going out into the world, whether he or she is going to work as a classicist or as a mathematician or as a philosopher. Reading and understanding these texts, placing them into a context where they make sense, and then being able to ask the appropriate questions of these texts, to inquire of these texts what meaning we can learn from them and how their contexts are different from our particular context. All of these are important things. So I really feel that we're in a time when life moves very, very quickly, when students feel as though they're pulled in many, many different directions. In general education, we ought to be involving students in content which everybody ought to know if he or she considers himself or herself an educated person. We ought to be helping those students to hone their skills, whatever it is, the content. We need to be asking them to hone their skills of analysis. One of the things that my students, and again, I might get some response from this, my students have to memorize a lot. And many of my students say to me that they've never been required to memorize anything. And I think that's a travesty. I myself don't see how one gets through the rest of the university or life without being able to memorize something. So these are all skills which I think we can probably find in any of our various areas of study. The one that I've chosen, because it centers on these central narratives of Western civilization, is classics. I have a wonderful group of students every single year. There aren't a lot of them. They know they're going to have to work hard, but a lot of them come right up to the bar, and they really succeed. So this is how I think that classics, my own particular program, contributes to general education. And I think that students, whatever their gen ed courses are, this happened to our son, ought to find these eureka moments where they find there's something I want to study further. There's something that really excites me and that I want to maybe major in, right? Because a lot of students come without knowing it. So this is the content, the skills, and the habits that I think a bit of work in general education in my own field, which is the classics, can contribute to general education at University of Montana. So thank you very much.
Well, and now for something completely different. So, just to place things into context, my background in my undergraduate education was pretty much the exact opposite to Mark's. I have a Bachelor of Arts in biochemistry. Kind of hard to do these days. I don't know if there are very many programs around, but it's because I went to a college that required that we fulfill area requirements and not just a single 3-credit course, but significant credits in multiple areas. And so I think it's a really interesting discussion to have about general education and its places, particularly moving on, in my case, to the professional schools. One of the things that I really enjoy, it was in thinking about this and trying to internalize and what points did I want to get across, I came across a definition of general education, a program of education intended to develop students as personalities rather than trained specialists, and to transmit a common culture. And I think that idea of a common culture harkens back to the idea of what does an educated person need to know. I think that there are many ways of going around it. A lot of schools are like ours, where there is a prescribed set of requirements. You have to go into 9 or 10 different areas, make sure that you've got one of them and one of them and one of them and one of them. I think what we can do is to do that a little bit better so that our students can see the synergy of those courses. I think that too often, when I talk to my students, I advise pre-pharmacy students. When I talk to my students, it's that, what do I have to get out of the way? Where am I going to go? What do I have to check off on my list? And in our requirements, our general education requirements are actually somewhat more prescribed than some of these other disciplines, where we suggest and encourage our students to take particular gen ed classes that are going to prepare them better, to be better people, to be better at learning different types of material, not just scientific material, but the fact that they're going to be out in a workforce, but they're going to be out in a profession where they have to interact with people. They have to be able to meet people where they are. They have to be able to understand people. They have to be able to make their profession understood. They have to be able to communicate. And until you go through a history class or a writing class or a language class or some other type of course where you actually have to sit down and think of the content, and the content is extremely important, but you're required to write and you're required to communicate clearly your background, your ideas. That carries over into so many different skill sets that anyone in any profession needs. I'll tell you, I spent many, many years in a laboratory standing at a bench and doing experiments, but you had to have a clear focus. You had to be able to write down exactly what you were going to do and why you were going to do it. And then you had to take the results and understand them, and then make them understandable to other places, to other people. Those all required skills that I learned in my version of general education courses, and that I hope our students learn in their version of general education courses here. Now, is it perfect? No. I don't know that anybody agrees that it's perfect. Can it be made better? Probably, but it's such a painful exercise. I'm looking back at Liz. Whenever the university tries to adjust its general education curriculum, there's a gnashing and wailing, and things need to stay, no, things need to go, and somehow we kind of end up with pretty much the same thing. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that what was important was the process of examination and the process of evaluation, and looking at, does this really supply our students with the way that they are going to be able to read and listen and view for comprehension, the way that they're going to be able to communicate effectively for various purposes and various audiences. Are they going to be able to understand and apply math and other quantitative skills? Because it doesn't matter if you are still, what you are doing, there's a way of analyzing your situation that somehow you're going to go back to that scientific method of looking at the data, no matter what the data are, and then being able to come into a conclusion. We want our students to be able to use various technologies competently, and not technology for technology's sake, but technology because that enables us to push forward and do more. And they should be able to work effectively together as well as individuals. That is a key skill. I can't tell you how many students I talk to who are, projects, and there's 2 weeks left, and I've got to get together with my group, and we have to do a project. And one of our favorite questions to ask when we're interviewing students for pharmacy school is, have you ever done a group project? How do you deal with the person who doesn't want to pull their weight? How do you keep in check the person who wants to do it all themselves? How do you mold those different personalities in so many different situations as you get into your adult life for our students? They have to work collaboratively. They have to work with people that have different skill sets. They have to be able to bring them together to move their enterprise forward no matter what it is. So those are skills that they learn in general education classes if they're done right. Okay? So I think I'm going to be really brief. I think that the main point to me for general education is connecting content to content. To be able to have students have the ability to synthesize things, to take together a concept from physics and put it to the concept from communication, and then add that into a concept where they have to write. So communication being oral communication. To put all that together, and that's when they realize that they're an educated person, that they've put everything together that they have at the university, and they can use it to move forward in whatever they want to do. Okay? Last point, in almost any professional school you look at, medical school, pharmacy school, law school, business administration, you name it, one of the key characteristics that they look for in students is their ability to have a broad education, that they have been exposed to all of these great ideas, these great facts, in some case from the classic. The idea that there is more to life than their narrow little field. It's really important to find your passion. I can't tell you, I tell my students, the best thing about being a scientist and maybe about being a mathematician or whatever is that eureka moment when you figured out something before anybody else knows it. There is just this little spark of absolute joy that I've got the answer. It finally makes sense. I've figured it out. And I think that's true in science. I think it's true when you're investigating Jim McCusick with Coleridge decided that he was going to trying to say in his books, no matter what your field, those eureka moments are what you want to enable your students to recognize when they happen. So general education in general, and also no matter what, students need to be able to be so well-rounded so that they have that to fall back on when they get into the minutia of memorizing all the facts that they need to know to pass that bar exam, to succeed in biochemistry, to move on in business, no matter what they decide to do. The idea that coming from the University of Montana, they are an educated person. Thank you.
Okay, we're into the Q&A. So we're eager to hear your comments and questions. We would like you to use one of the mobile devices and speak into the microphone. And I will recognize the questions, and you can direct them. If it's a comment, fine, and you can ask for a particular person to respond, but you can also direct them to the panel in general, and then we'll ask for one of the members to respond. Okay.
Tobin, way in the back.
Tobin.
Thanks to all of the panelists for reminding us of the wonder and the spark that general education can be. For the last year and a half, I've had the privilege of sitting on the Gen Ed committee, and I've been struck by how about 75 to 90% of our work is filling out forms, counting credits, and culling courses. My question for the three or the four of you is, what principles can we enact within our existing structure without perceiving the Armageddon that is an entire restructuring of the whole ball of wax, that invites principles that encourage that spark and wonder in our students as faculty members?
Who would like to answer?
Well, I'll go for it. Can you hear me? Is this on? Maybe that'll be good and maybe it won't be. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll turn it off. There have been some interesting articles lately about a concept called design thinking in the Chronicle of Higher Education. And this has to do with, starts out, I think, with business and with technology investigations and how you come up with new ideas and so on and so forth in the technology field or wherever. And I believe it started at Stanford. Is that where the big institute center was written about? And one of the things that some humanists who responded to this kind of undertaking pointed out was that there was in these centers, in these institutes within universities, there was place for play and there was place for asking questions, even if you weren't going to know the answer to the question. And we do have a pretty strong ethic of research in the university. And research often comes down to, or seems, I think, to students to come down to finding the answer to a question. But what these institutes have tried to do was to give students and faculty an area, both a physical place and a relational area, in which they could just toss around ideas, in which they could just sort of play with whatever the content was, mathematics or classics, humanities, whatever. And the good part of this was alleged to be that people grow from doing this and people become excited by doing this. They can be excited by the process just of playing, just of thinking about things together without having to worry too much about what the answer is. And I think that we're pretty focused in our classes and elsewhere. I mean, for instance, in my classes, there's often a right answer or a wrong answer. And how much fun you had dealing with a Latin sentence doesn't really come into your grade at the end, you know. So I maybe that might say something for it, Tobin. Might be that if we could find a place, physical as well as metaphorical, for faculty and students to be together a little bit more on an informal basis, to kind of kick around possibilities and kick around questions, that might help. It might take us as faculty members out of the answering seat, having the answer seat, and the students out of the seat of the people who had to be always looking for the right answer.
Let me just add, you can't tweak a bad system into a good system. You can tweak it in a less bad system. And a radical restructuring is called for. I think our present system is a disaster. And the faculty has to get together and decide what is it that the educated person needs to know. And then once decided, when staff decided that, teach that. And otherwise, we don't really have a general education program or approaching the point where a random walk through the catalog will satisfy the general education program. Yes.
So in listening to this lecture, I've got a lot of amazing points from all of you. One in particular for each of you that I saw that really fit in with the line of thinking that I had in mind before I ever came here today was, first of all, from Albert, talking about students entering the complex of education and going into a single room and never leaving. And I think the reason that people do that is a lot of times they're a little misguided and they're not sure where exactly to go. And once they get to a place, it takes them a while to find out where they are. And afterwards, they're scared of going into the unknown. There's the obvious realities of accumulating student debt. And I mean, we can't all just educate ourselves indefinitely. So you get in, you decide on a course, you take some classes, and you need to get into upper division things eventually. For Mark, he was talking about for math, what he wanted for his students when they were going to leave their undergraduate education or whatever kind of education they may aspire to. He wanted them to build an appreciation for the subject that they were doing, and I think that's very important. And for Linda, she was talking about wanting her students to be educated on the important issues that are required to be an intellectual, to be an educated person in this society. And Elizabeth, she was talking about being able to link this content together, these important subjects that we need to gain some expertise and appreciation for, these subjects that we need to understand in order to be this intellectual, this educated person that we want to build. And I think that there's...
Is there a question?
No. I'm sorry, I'm taking way too long here. Please give me just one more moment.
Sure, you bet.
Okay, so I think there's a way that we can go about all of this, that we can do this without concerning ourselves with the curriculum or opening Armageddon, as we had previously, Pandora's box, as we had previously mentioned. And I think that's when students come in, especially the ones who haven't decided on a particular passion, the ones that are undecided majors entering freshmen, they need to be able to see these different subjects in action. They need to see these people talk about provocative issues from various lenses.
You have to come to your question.
My question is, can we have a dialogue session like this from undergraduates, from tenured faculty, for the students, where everyone can get together and talk about provocative issues from the various lenses, where we can talk about these things from various expertises, not just at a graduate level or at a level where it's just the educated elite, but where even undergraduates can get together and see what it's like to have everybody link content to content, see what the expertises are, see what they want to study?
Well, I once headed a task force on general education, and consulting widely is absolutely necessary. I agree. But you can't leave it at that. You have to take all this together and then fashion it into some kind of curriculum if we want to meet our obligations to the students. But are there responses? Liz?
No, I think that you need multiple constituencies. If you're going to undertake something like a reset of what we consider general education, I think two things are necessary. The first is you have to decide what general education is going to be on your campus. And then the second is that in order to do that, you're going to have to engage all of the constituencies. But that's something that the entire campus is going to have to be committed to. It's not going to work if a small task force is engaged to do it and no one else is engaged. It has to be a university-wide engagement, otherwise it's going to fail.
Okay, back there.
Oh, I have the microphone. Is that oh, Gigi, do you want to share with me? We do choral reading? Okay. Thank you so much for this very invigorating panel. I wanted to let you know that I loved imaginary numbers. And maybe it was the concept of imaginary that allowed me to enter the world of math. So thank you so much. And of course, the classics and professional schools. We're all in this together. Some of you may remember back in 1980, oh my gosh, my generations, 1981, 82, 83, 84, we engaged the entire campus community with what it meant to have a general education vision. And in the old days, we had 12 credits, anything in natural sciences, 12 credits in anything in social sciences, and 12 credits in the humanities. And that was quite amorphous and vague, and I don't think our students had a sense of what it truly meant to have a general education here. We made a step forward to the perspectives and the foundational courses, the capstones, and the writing requirements. I think as we move forward, we're going to have to engage again in that reflection on what it means to be an educated member of not only our local communities, but also the global communities. And that includes Indian Education for All, which was not really on our landscape at that time. So I think as the world changes and as we become more informed members of our own communities in the world, we'll have this ongoing conversation. One of the things I'm struck with in our conversation today is we, as faculty members, may know what it means when we have general education requirements. The question is, how do we engage our students in these ongoing reflections so that they understand what we, the architects of general education, had in mind? I think that's a real challenge because we all teach our discipline, we all teach in our courses and so forth, but do we really help our students make the connection between our individual classes and core requirements for majors and the rest of general education? That's something I think we all need to consider. Thank you.
And let me just add to this. Tim Fleitner was the hero of general education at this university. And with incredible energy and persistence, he helped to fashion a sound, coherent general education program that met the obligations that we have to our students to let them be a world citizen. And but the core curriculum at Harvard, the Fleitner program, there should be like monument era perennius.
Indeed.
A monument more lasting than bronze, but in fact they turn out to be sandcastles. And the waves come, shortly after you have fashioned them in the most beautiful way. And they get disfigured. And technically speaking, the core curriculum has added courses and added courses. My course too should count as ethics. My course too should count as physics. And then, you get, Fleitner's had 190, the equivalent of 190 semester courses. Now we have double that. And that can't be capturing what the educated person needs to know.
Albert, may I add something?
Please, yeah.
Bev, I agree with you, and I think that maybe one of the harder things to change is going to be the way we talk to our students about general education. The majors have become, for various reasons, more and more and more important, and in some quarters there's a resentment of increasing gen ed or having any general education courses which are at the upper division, which might be more complex and more sort of challenging than our basic courses. But I just have the sense that on this campus, as on many others, we talk about getting gen ed out of the way at the first year level or the second year level. And as long as we talk to our students about that, I don't think that we can in any way hope that they'll feel differently about gen ed, no matter what we explain to them about what the distribution requirements mean or why there are 12 groups or whatever. I think that it's the sense we have that all of our majors are the most important things and that gen ed, we've got to do it. But would you agree? I mean,
I like to think of merging lanes of traffic, general education,
okay,
merges
yeah.
with the majors, and then my work with education as a professional merges with that, and then it's very synergistic. The question is, do my students understand that they're living the synergy? Can they articulate it so that I know that they know?
Not as long as we don't articulate it to them, I think.
Gigi, you have a question?
So my question is Asia part of what every educated person should know? Is it part of general education? And would it be part of classics next year when we have Hindi? You recall I wanted to put Hindi in classics.
Yeah. I absolutely. I absolutely think so. I don't see how the educated person can live today without knowing a lot more about various parts of Asia than I do, and then most of our students do. So I agree. As a classicist, I don't want to say these are the only important stories that we have, but I do think we have to look around and see what it is we all need to know, and I don't see how we can ignore Asia. Right? It seems stupid.
I find that the microphone is often a mistake in my hands.
We can take it away, Sue. We can take it away. Right.
I've been asked not to use one before, so I guess what I wanted to bring up is I'm delighted that you've talked about truth and passion and eureka moments as an important counterbalance to the whole workforce spectrum. But I want to get at the citizenship question, which I think is so fundamental to our responsibility as educators, and the need for an ongoing dialogue where students understand that they're inheriting their responsibility as part of a civilizational thread that, albeit increasingly complex and including Asia and including many new and diverse understandings since maybe the beginning of those threads, we still have a responsibility to weave ourselves together. And the fragmentation, the fundamental fragmentation of the curriculum in our university structures creates structural barriers to that Gen Ed somehow needs to mend and provide a forum and structure in which to weave that together. And I think our current situation is sort of this weak compromise where everyone gets a piece and we settle for it in a sense that we have these distributions, but what we don't have is a dialogue or a forum for that dialogue, and the dialogue has become more important than ever. And I'm going to throw this out there. We have young people in our country who feel that the West is so bereft of any moral sensibility or purpose that they're going to join terrorist forces, for God's sake, on the other side of the world. We have a responsibility to help them understand that the West is so much more than conquest, so much more than hegemony, and it has something to offer in the richness of questions, in the richness of real issues, in the richness of what it takes to become one people, and to recognize that our neighbors, though we may disagree with them so very extremely at times, are nevertheless our neighbors. And we need to redefine communities by creating opportunities and skills in dialogue, and I don't know exactly how we do this. Clearly it begins with a dialogue, but speaking to this somehow, I guess I would like to hear your thoughts on the citizenship component, which I think is so urgent.
I agree with you, but why can't we hear somebody else's thoughts about the citizenship component? Would that work? Is anybody out there who would like to talk to what Sue just said?
Lori?
Would you mind? Ian?
Yeah, to Linda and anyone else who'd like to respond, can we be a good citizen if we don't have at least some knowledge of a second language, which after all is the door into understanding other cultures?
Thanks. Thanks, Tom.
Laura? Well, the answer is yes. No, second language.
Okay.
And any second language. Chinese. Bravo, bravo, whoever takes it on. Or Latin, Greek. Yeah. Okay. Lori.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the extension of the conversation from the training, which I think the universities have been headed toward for a long time, to citizenship, but I don't want to rule out what we would do if there were no problems in the world. We'd still want to be educated. We'd still want to learn the beautiful poetry and the great ideas of what it means to be human. And for me, as a humanities person, that is the core of education. It isn't a problem to be solved. That's a piece of it, but we become, I've seen it quite a bit in the Honors College. I've seen it quite a bit with the Global Leadership Initiative. Education has been a matter of who can pose the question in terms of a problem to be solved. And when I come in and say, does anyone read French poetry? There's a sense that I live in La La Land. And I think that if we return to the humanities as a core for the university, then we understand why we care about the problems and how they've developed and what might be some of the best ways to approach those solutions. I've had 3 conversations today with history majors who want to be involved in the world, and just making that link, how does being a history major help you be better at solving this problem in the Middle East when you're going to go work for an NGO or going off to India on a special program with the Clinton Global Fellowship? And their eyes just light up because that's not how they have been taught about their subject matter, that it is in fact more practical while also being more inspiring. So I'd be interested in ideas about the humanities that don't make them sound like an unnecessary dessert in the educational meal.
May I just get back to Tom's question? Thank you, Lori. As a humanist, I agree with you. I think it's hard to maintain that one is a global citizen graduating from a global university, as we assert that we are, without ever having made an attempt to study anyone else's language. A student who takes a language requirement, fulfills a language requirement at this university, may go to another area in the world and not use that particular language. But to understand what it is to learn somebody else's language is, I think, important, even if for no other reason than, as I said before, millions, if not billions of people are learning our language every day. And the lesson that we've drawn from that is that we don't have to learn their languages because they'll learn ours. And I think there's something that's very arrogant about that. My languages are languages, I mean, I do German and I do Italian and I read some French, but the languages which I teach are not languages in which we communicate. But to know how people communicate and to know how many options there are and to have some respect for them, I think is important. So as any of my colleagues who have been around on campus with me know, I'm a very strong advocate for a language requirement. I think we should have a stronger language requirement than we do on this campus, although we're moving in the right direction. But I would say, to your question, no, it's not possible to maintain that one is a global citizen without having at least tried to learn another language. I myself worry when we have institutes which claim to be putting out global leaders and don't require that they study another language. I can't make sense of that. I know some people can on the campus, and that's fine. But I would say no, Tom, I think. Yeah, there's a mic coming.
I'm wondering whether you think that a stronger, more well-rounded general education program may, in some respects, require more well-rounded faculty members, less emphasis on hiring on specialization within the disciplines, and also more emphasis on teaching skills.
I may be the odd person to take this on, but I will. I think that anyone who has gotten to the point where they're an expert in a very small area has had to have a foundation that's fairly broad. I believe that most of the faculty that we do hire come from strong places where they have had a broad base. Perhaps the issue is in reminding them of that and reminding them, if they are teaching those general education courses, to bring that passion back. So I don't necessarily think that we're hiring the wrong people. I think that we are hiring people with good skill sets. I believe that people who do scholarship think of their discipline in a very much more intimate way than perhaps somebody who doesn't have that luxury of doing that scholarship, who's only required to do so much teaching that they can't get at that. Because I think that that scholarship brings an added dimension to the way that they teach. And I think it adds a lot to how they interact with their students.
Is Gigi still here? Gigi, are you still back there? Gigi Wykes was asking me the other day, what if we had a general education faculty? Gigi, are you there?
Yes.
She said fellows.
Call them fellows, she said.
Oh.
Call them general education fellows.
General education fellows. Okay, would you tell us, Gigi, about what that was? Because it was a good idea.
Well, we have a number of projects on campus that reward people for dedicating themselves to teaching general education through global leadership, through the pedagogy project, through, you can name half a dozen. We used to have the freshman interest group. There's been all sorts of experiments. But I think it would be wonderful to just have 40 or 50 individuals on campus designated as fellows. It wouldn't necessarily mean that they would stand up and teach in front of 500 people. Some people do that well, but other people teach, the seminars in the Honors College very well. Some people don't teach at all. They're full-time researchers, but they're very broadly educated. They're inspiring to students. They speak multiple languages. They travel widely and wildly. And they could all be part of a fellowship. And they could bring in and knit together all of these different siloed experiments to, rather than concentrating on the curriculum, which is endless, just concentrate on the people, because the strengths of this campus are the faculty.
Well, I'm sorry to say the word. I didn't want to talk today, but I think maybe we should think about it differently at all. So we are talking about what is the knowledge, what they need to know. I am thinking about skills. See, I am bilingual, and I told this at the chairs meeting. Just imagine, everyone tells me, I took 3 semesters of Russian, 4 semesters of Russian. They cannot put 2 sentences together. Mm-hmm. I think general education must be something that becomes a part of one's life. In mathematics is everywhere. When you balance your checkbook, when you think about mortgage, this is where mathematics is, how you kind of share inheritance. People need to know this part of the culture. About languages, they need to speak the language. I mean, yes, rules are important, so forth, but when I actually took a year of Japanese before going to Japan, and actually my main goal was not about the rules. And by the way, Japan is very good language for mathematicians to speak. It's very structured. But I wanted to speak, and I did. And it took me 1 year. About biology, when you go to a pharmacy and you take a pill, you need to know how it works. And this needs to be on a gut level. So if we pay too much attention to formalities, this is the knowledge. This is not the knowledge. We need, think about a student who comes to me and says, you know what, I'm a chair. I have a lot of unhappy students coming to me and say, you know what, I got A in this class, but I never take any math class ever again. So this is, I think, a disaster. So therefore, we need to, from my viewpoint, to think about students who will kind of have this skill of learning. They want to know about mathematics, languages, history. See, history is a very tricky subject. Being from Russia, I can tell you, there is, it is not, I mean, in America, it's also very, very tricky because there is a special area, mathematical history, and there is an article about this in Notices of Mathematical Society of America. It's very interesting that every country writes its own history, and when mathematicians try to kind of line them all together, it's a very controversial thing, and this is what people need to know. And I would say there is a difference between indoctrination and kind of general education. I mean, Asia is important, but if you are part of Western society, actually, you first learn kind of Western kind of cultural, so forth. It's a short comment.
So Gayatri Spivak put it very well 25 years ago. She hoped undergraduates would have cultural heritage, they would be aware of their own cultural heritage, whatever it is, and that as graduate students they would gain transnational literacy. And now, today, 25 years later, I think we're expecting undergraduates to have more transnational literacy because of the global century.
Okay, let's have one more question.
Hi. So I teach a number of gen ed classes in physics and astronomy, 2 in fact, and I also engage in some public outreach types of things. And recently, in a number of these situations, I've had people ask me, I'll do the end of a planetarium show, and I'll say, any questions? And they'll get topical questions about the night. And then someone will say, why should we study the stars? And this has happened to me several times recently, and I've started strategically formulating answers and responses to be ready for this. But you could imagine this question coming from somebody, why should we study French poetry? Or if you prefer, pourquoi étudier la poésie française? Right? So, scientists. All right, so I'm curious among the panelists if you have any thoughts on this. If approached for that topic, one of the things that hit me, I come from a background, my undergrad, my grad, my postdoc, all at large state liberal arts institutions. And then I come here to the flagship liberal arts institution in the state of Montana, and I meet locals, and they're like, oh, the dance school. So there's this dismissive notion of liberal arts education, and to the point where we almost changed the name to general education or distribution or core requirements, as opposed to just saying liberal education. So I'm curious, what's your response to, are you ever confronted with this? Why should students be wasting their time in history or French poetry or friggin' astronomy? And what would you say? I'm looking at Linda, but anyone, please.
So, as a mathematician, I get a related question. I think many people don't question the utility of mathematics, but the question is, it's not really a question, in fact. It's an observation. I studied math until grade N, and I grew to hate it, and then I never took any more classes. And then sometimes students will ask your question, why are we looking at this? And my best answer is not to pretend that this is all very useful, because most of the stuff we do in a math class is not directly applicable to anything that they're going to go through in their life. So I put back a question to them: what's the point of a symphony? What's the point of a poem? What's the point of a song? And depending on, so the students I'm thinking of right now are music majors and minors. I've been teaching a course on math and music. So if you put it in terms, what's the point of a symphony for them, then they see the parallel. And I get away from having to convince them that this is useful, and they start to see that, it's actually kind of interesting. So I'm studying it because it's interesting. And I get a lot of buy-in from my students that way. Others?
Well, it's interesting that you're in physics, because our pre-pharmacy majors are always asking me, why do we have to take physics? So, and actually there was a kid at the State Science Fair who had a T-shirt, and it said, if it squeals, it's biology, if it stinks, it's chemistry, and if it doesn't work, it's physics. Did you see him? Yeah. But what I tell them is that it's not that you're going to remember all those physical, the principles and the laws and what the equations are, but it's the idea that you can now look at something quantitatively, and you can look at it and see how it's constructed and have an approach to it, a problem, and be able to address it and move forward. Not that you specifically remember your physics, but that you have a quantitative analysis skill, and that's the reason why we require physics. So I do get that question too.
I'm on this group called the AAIP. Our chief is sitting right next to you, Nate. And one part of our charge was to talk about how the university might better and more effectively represent itself as a liberal arts university, because that's part of our mission. That's what we say we are. That's what our president thinks we are. And I've been reading a good bit about this, and there's a fellow who wrote an article about liberal arts some years ago. Now we've begun to talk about it as a liberal education, right? Because it gets rid of that kind of fluffy arts thing. Right? But this fellow happens to be a classicist, and he was pointing out that the word arts comes from skills. That's actually what it meant in Latin, was a skill. And that the word liberal doesn't have anything to do with a political orientation, but that the liberal arts were the skills which were supposed to be characteristic of a person who could call himself a free person and could live freely in a community and was not back then entrapped by work. Right? And now we don't really think of it in that way, but we might think of this still as the skills, using arts in that old way, the skills that a person needs to have to live as a free citizen of a community. And that is, we need to know something about how our physical and astronomical world works. We need to know something about language. We need to know the kinds of artifacts that human beings have left behind them, and whether we want to go where they were before or not ever tread that path again. And so I think that makes a little better sense. He talks about this in a phrase which I'm not sure I like too much, but he says, let's talk about the liberal arts as the skills of freedom now. The skills that make you able to be a free citizen and act as an arguing, discussing, thinking, evaluating citizen. So I thought that was sort of an interesting idea, because we tend to think of liberal in a particular way now, we think of art in a particular way, and both of those kind of drive various people crazy. And if we could just think of a different way to talk about it, it might make clear why we need to know physics and astronomy, and we need to know something about math, and we need to know something about French poetry or Southeast Asian poetry or whatever. That this is what makes us a person who's able to live in a global world and understand really what goes on around us.
Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for your comments, and thank you, Carol.